Thank you very, very much for staying, and we would love it if you would stay a little bit longer. Who knows what's lurking outside, so just relax and enjoy a conversation with us using words and sentences. What's the worst that could happen? We would like to welcome back on stage the directors of Common Birds, Silvia Maglioni and Graeme Thomson. And also Frederick Jäger, Davidka Girish, and Dunja Bialas, representing partly the Woche, the Kritik. Do we have enough microphones for everyone?
Yeah, that's fine.
I think we will share.
Yes.
And we'll have some rum if you want. I guess you're the closest to the bottle, so you'll have to work.
Yeah, maybe I will begin. At first, at a superficial level, only to ask what was your impression about the confrontation of these two different movies, which relate in some topics with each other and talk with each other, mirroring each other. Did you see it? Did you think it fits, or was it completely absurd for you? What was your impression? I asked the whole audience, the rest of the audience, and
yeah, please feel free to.
Perhaps we could do the old game of raising hands. So who did like the confrontation of the two films? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, yes, 5, 6, yes. And who didn't like it?
that's a success.
1, okay, so it's me.
What did you not like about it?
Maybe use the microphone if you could.
Yeah, but I use the microphone.
No. Oh, me? Yeah. Okay, sorry. So what did you not like about the confrontation?
I think it was a bit cheap, so to speak. And I felt a bit sorry about the first film we saw. And I had the impression of using it as a starting point to go somewhere else. And just to take it just like a material or starting point of an idea, and so confronting it with something very, for me it was quite obvious, your choice. So it wasn't bad. I liked the choice, but I didn't like the confrontation.
What do you mean by cheap?
Yeah, it also...
I'm sorry. What do you mean by cheap?
So, as I said, for me it was too obvious, simply. So you have this topic of language and translation and the danger of language, and so it was very like with a big exclamation mark for me, and also to going into genre film, and so to have some standard situations of this kind of Hollywood-influenced cinematography, and this was really the opposite of the film we saw before. So not to go into a standard situation, to think in a different way about language, and to use this as a tool of real subversive strategies or ideas. And for me, it was just too superfluous and too obvious.
I think Pontypool helps us to see all the greatness of Common Birds. I think that watching this mise en scène, the acting, all the relationship of the filmic devices to its objects, you just realize how good a film can be when it really wants to do something that has to do with what's in front of the camera. So it's, I mean, watching Pontypool, of course, exasperated me extremely. because I feel like it's a film that's, I don't know if it's trying to work with the codes of genre. I think it's mostly just trying to put pieces together to somehow work when it's so obvious that it can't. So it's at such a filmic level that it doesn't deserve the discourse that Common Birds does.
I kind of disagree with both of you. I liked the pairing a lot, actually, and it took me a while to figure out why. I mean, I kind of had to stick with Pontypool, which when it began, I was just like, what is this B-movie TV shtick we're watching? And I thought maybe it was like a gimmick to be contrarian. But I think it really did enrich the previous film, and it worked really well because, and maybe I'm playing into what Dunya called obvious, but I struggled a little bit with Common Birds, not in the sense of appreciating it, but I do think it's a difficult film to access on many levels. I mean, I'm not familiar with the source texts. There's obviously a lot of linguistic exchange happening within the film, and it's a film that tests your attention and comprehension in sort of very clever and deliberate ways. And it's a film that I think is difficult to enjoy. I mean, I couldn't use the word enjoy for it. But then after watching Pontypool, I felt like I appreciated the pleasure of incomprehension and was thinking about the value of incomprehension. And I was thinking of Roland Barthes in The Empire of Signs, when he visits Japan, and he writes about the pleasure of being in this murmuring mass of an unknown language. You know, the fact that our identities and experiences are so enclosed by language that when we're confronted with true unintelligibility is when we can think of something actually novel. And I think that really feeds into, at least my interpretation of Common Birds, the idea that to think about creating new worlds, to think of truly utopian ideas, you need to bypass, you know, the codes, linguistic codes that we're trapped within. So I think Pontypool takes this really abstract idea and literalizes it in its genre format, but even though there's that literal connection of language, I think the larger connection for me is comprehension and incomprehension. So honestly, it revealed new layers in Common Birds for me, and so I'm really glad I sort of got to experience both. Also, Dunya and I didn't know what this second film was. Like,
Yes, we didn't know.
Had no idea what it was, who it was by, nothing. So we encountered this absolutely anew, just so everyone knows.
Yes, we can continue with comments from the directors. What did you think? Okay.
Because we heard beforehand that you already knew the film. You have already seen Pontypool before.
We knew of it, but we saw it
quite recently.
You mean you saw it right now, or?
We saw it just a few days ago.
Mm-hmm. And what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't really want to offer a critique about it because I don't really think that's our place here. I mean, I think that for us, the question of this confrontation is also about how creating this prism tends to, in a sense, determine the way that one thinks about our film. Since we're here to talk about our film as well, it tends to kind of determine, like, say, for example, that Pontypool is very much about this question of toxicity and language, or virus, you know, this William Burroughs thing which runs through it, of language as a virus. But it's actually maybe a film to talk about in relation to coronavirus rather than to talk about in relation to our film. But
sorry, to what?
Coronavirus, yes. Maybe a topical film in that regard. But I think that the question for us was also that when we saw it, we thought this question, this insistence on language as its almost its only trope, was in a way of like saying our film is only in a sense related to the question of what it does with language, and for us our film is not just that. It's not just about language and its limits, it's also about all of the other things which for us are about our cinematic, which, I mean, cinema as an experience for us is not primarily necessarily even a discursive experience. It's not even a linguistic experience. It's not even a linguistic form. I mean, we take issue with people who talk about cinema as a language anyway. So, yeah.
Yeah, another thing that I was surprised about is saying that our film is about something. This word about, for us, not just this film, but the previous films, but talking about Common Birds, we were trying to define it, because when you enroll it in festivals, you always have to tick boxes and stuff. So we came up with this idea that it's the documentary of a fiction and the fiction of a documentary at the same time, meaning that also there is this strong Spinozian joy that traversed the whole process, and the question of language was not that it's about language, but it was like a true experience and a journey that we all lived together. And of course, it's also very, very precise in all the phases of montage, post-production, etc. But I would still think that there is a side of the film that is like the documentary of a fiction, or the fiction of a documentary. So it's like walking the walk, as Robert Kramer would say, or like really doing it rather than being about something. But for me, films are not about. It's always like a question of an existential territory or a potential space. And even this thing, liking, not liking, we've really rejected for many years these categories of like and not like in a film. Is more what stays with you in time and what you can do with it in a Deleuzian sense, as a toolbox that it enables you to think in a different way or to desire in a different way. So, yeah.
Is this something that will be true about every film? Sorry.
We just an order of...
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think similar to what Frederick was about to say, maybe, is I just wonder if that question of discursivity, it's not, is it escapable for any film? And even when you say, we don't, you don't want to say what the film is about, but the very act of trying to say that is saying something, saying, unless we just like didn't say anything, we would always come to the question of saying what the film is about, even if we didn't use the word about, just using any language to describe it. And, when we were coming up with these double features, and this was my first time really, programming in a professional context, so it was very interesting for me to like try to figure out what makes a good double feature. I was kind of learning from these guys and trying to figure that out. And it was really confusing because it's like sometimes it's like, oh, these are too similar. Sometimes it's like one film will completely enclose the other, right? So we also talked about, in certain cases, should we invert the order? Will the first film completely determine how the second is taken? And at the end of the day, it's anytime you show films in an order, the question of overdetermination exists. And, all of these questions exist. So what I kind of settled upon was, okay, what combinations will generate the most interesting questions? I mean, what film will generate the most interesting questions about another film? And it's really broad and open-ended, but I don't know how else you could escape all these other traps when you're programming something in a series and when you have conversation surrounding it.
Yeah, actually, it's about frictions and also of a framing. And I have the impression, and it's also with the question talking about the subject now. I think in our discussions we never talked about the subject of Common Birds, but it's introduced by this other film who had this strong subject and this very obvious subject. And I think this is this kind of framing I don't like in this combination. You get a strong perspective right now on Common Birds, and of course you can see the qualities, but I have seen them before, so I didn't need the second film to discover them. I thought this was really like a performance on the screen. This experience in the theater was really amazing. I think I haven't seen it before in the theater, and this was speaking for itself, in my opinion.
Okay. I don't understand so much this oppositions here. It's a little bit absurd for me, because I think you can. You don't have to think that it's that the one movie is overshadowing the other. You can have both experiences. It's only it's only one aspect of the movie which mirrors in the other, and it's a possibility to think it in a different way, but it's not this. I have the impression that you think we want to overshadow one movie with the other, and this is not our intention. And I think also we watch movies and we never understood this whole segregation stuff. I understand the importance of being critical and of mainstream movies, but we never really have this segregation thing that we we don't have this discussion. It's a mainstream movie, or it's a genre cinema movie, or it's an art house movie, or something. We only watch the movie, and sometimes it's an aesthetic way of watching it, and sometimes it's a discursive way of watching it, and sometimes it's a different way. I don't think it's necessary to make a politic of it. Yeah,
I don't believe you. No, I really don't think that what you just said is true. I think that you think about these categories and you try to work with them. And I think that this Pontypool is not mainstream at all. I think it's a film that tries to work with some genre elements, and it's a film for a specific niche. I think. In this, you said it's a little bit reminiscent of some kind of B movies. And I think it has some of that. It's not so much B because it's also not showing much, and it is in a way trying also to be a little bit arty about it. So it's kind of somewhere in between. I think that it's very difficult to see those two films knowing that there's a trouble feature and not thinking about the intention lying behind the pairing. In a way, yes, there is a reflection of why did you react with this film to the other? And this is something I was thinking about, and I had the impression that not so much about the topic actually. For me, I realized that there is something in both of them that you can link, but for me the reaction I felt was more about this kind of provocation of an idea of, you said, segregation, which is exactly the opposite of what we're doing at Critics Week, because we really like to show films that come from different horizons and that work with different languages and cinematic forms. In this way, for me, also, it was a cheap shot. It was like, okay, this film works very differently, it's very story-based, and it wants to wants to tell something in a more obvious way and things like that. So I thought that for me, especially the acting, because you're always in these close-ups, so it's a film a lot about acting, and there I had some reactions to the relationship you work with the actors, which is so completely different. So for me, it's not so much overshadowing, it's more like it's highlighting different forms of cinema and bringing them in a kind of a position that I don't find so productive.
I don't know. I think you're maybe oversimplifying the second film by saying that it's obvious and it's using story in an obvious way. In the beginning, I suspected. The opening sequence completely took me out. I had no idea what to expect, and then when it took me so long to get my bearings. I mean, it starts with some kind of cop movie or cop TV show tropes, and then there's a little bit of horror. Then it's about a radio station and the middle of nowhere, Canada, and it doesn't let you get your bearings so quickly, and there's genuine strangeness in the movie. I don't really think it's obvious. Yes, there are moments when it's literal, but it's still quite strange, and it's still, I think conceptually it is not fully graspable, and I think so the designation that it is a strict contrast and that one movie is obvious and the other isn't, I don't think that's fair here.
If I may just also answer maybe to what Frederick said. Firstly, I do admit that when we paired these films, we certainly were thinking about the categories that are floating about in this film culture discourse. It was not that we were not aware of them, but it was certainly not our intention, and it isn't still not our intention to create any kind of opposition. It is quite the opposite. We believe that, and we don't think that your film is about language. We don't think, we agree, I think you said earlier to us that you think films are bodies. I think that's a nice way to put it. And we believe there are different kinds of bodies, and they have different kinds of, properties. They elicit different kinds of reactions. And we think that it's interesting to find common ground between them when one might not expect there to be so much common ground. I don't think that in the case of these two films, it's just about the language and the idea of language is a virus or whatever. We have to change language to change society. It's also about an idea of how one is enclosed and surrounded and how one can get out, and maybe also how one can find ways of, breaching boundaries, how the close-ups are also, yes, of course, there's different kinds of acting or different kinds of filming faces, but it's not, I think that Pontypool also has a lot of attention to the faces of the people behind the camera, and I think that it's interesting to say maybe this kind of film, whatever that means, can also have this kind of potential.
When I was watching the second film, I was thinking about what would I put as a second film, as a trouble or whatever feature. And this is honestly a difficult question to answer, but I think for me the problem was this kind of similarity that you mentioned in confrontation of dimensions, of course. So there aren't similarities, but you have some things similar in these both films. So you can compare them in a very easy way, as I think. And this perhaps was what was bothering me a lot.
Why was it bothering you?
Because I didn't felt challenged. So I didn't had to think about why are these films were put together. I didn't had to ask me this question because I saw it. It was so. This is what I mean with obvious. So I don't know. It was so there weren't any secrets about it. I think. Perhaps I'm too harsh or too strict, but that was what I was feeling.
That's also part of the trouble. If you disagree, that's also the sense of our trouble features, that you can disagree and that it's fine. Yeah.
But may I ask the filmmakers, do you think that there is an opposition in any way, shape or form between your film and Pontypool?
No, I don't. I mean, opposition doesn't really mean anything interesting. I mean, because films are complex entities. I mean, what does it mean to say this is the opposite of that? That's not an interesting question for us. I think that the question, I think, maybe is also about, this is an operation in some ways of montage, of putting these two films together, these two, I mean, we can't say two images together, but we can say two films together. And when we think about montage ourselves, we often think, I mean, what you could say also about the question of the ecology of cinema as a part of life. And sometimes we think that cinema, talking to cinema is not necessarily enough. That, in a sense, the montage that we need to make is with the film and life outside of the cinema. So, just as a question of, let's say, a spatio-temporal experience, sometimes, for example, I mean, I would say, and here, okay, you put together double features, okay, fair enough. But sometimes I would think that, you know, the experience that we try to make, making a film, is also something that then people can then take outside without necessarily having another film as a kind of reflective surface to immediately enclose themselves in. And in this regard, I found that the question of the enclosure of Pontypool, because it is a film in a way of kind of locked room, kind of enclosure film, it kind of, in a sense, revealed a symptom of the whole idea of the trouble feature itself, which is to say, to create this kind of enclosure in which the films produce this kind of how we could call it, this space of reverberation or something, that then we forget that there's an outside. Sorry, I'm not. Are you recording actually this? Or yeah. Okay, sorry. That we forget that there is an outside, and that sometimes the thing to do is to make the montage with the outside and not with another film.
I was wondering, sorry, you were gonna say something?
You go first.
I just have a question.
Go ahead.
Because you're saying that you like the idea, or you like the practice of seeing your film and then going outside with it, or not having another film reflect the experience. How do you feel about film festivals? Because I think your films are often in film festivals. Would you rather your films not be in film festivals? Because the common experience of seeing a film in a film festival is amongst many other films, and in the regular theater, cinema practice, it would be you see one film and then you go out. You don't see another one.
The festivals we like generally are festivals that think the programming as a kind of constellation where films can help each other to exist. So no matter whether they are different, or sometimes because they are very different, but that the festival itself can become this complex ecosystem where the films are actually allies, and they create, like a map where. So, and then, of course, the question of seeing one film after another, it's a very personal question. Sometimes when I see a film that really means something for me, my reaction would be to go to take a walk in a forest, or to not necessarily to watch another one immediately, but that's the habit that one has. But in terms of festivals, I can think of a number of festivals that have really this idea of creating constellations of creatures that help each other and protect each other also, especially fragile films that can live together in an ecosystem.
I just wanted to say, I mean, I agree with the idea of, like festival watching films back to back. They can impose certain frameworks on films, they can cheapen them, but posing sort of a devil's advocate argument that I also kind of believe in, is I think I use this phrase also about the outside world in cinema, but it strikes me as a bit of a false binary, because what do you mean by the outside world? Is it a world not mediated by screens, not technological, a return to nature? I mean, the film is part of the world and of reality, so it's part of lived experience. And I'm not quite sure that you would avoid confrontations if you went on a walk. I mean, I could watch a film that was very enclosed, or very sterile, and then I could go take a walk in a forest, and that would be a stark opposition or contrast and impose a different kind of framework.
No, I'm not talking about, it's just sometimes you don't need language, or you don't need another thing, you just want to void yourself, or withdraw from communication, withdraw from...
Can you withdraw from communication, or can you avoid yourself from language ever, even if you're alone in a park with your own thoughts?
It's not a question of park or a city or anything else. I mean, this question of language is a kind of a long-term project we've been working on. We actually started a school for language unlearning, and a center for language unlearning, and whether you can or not, whether you want or not, it's a challenge,
But I would say also that, I mean, we also, think that certainly the outside world is not entirely mediated by screens or by images. I mean, or rather, we would seek that. We would seek a world that is not entirely mediated. Even if it's an impossible dream or whatever, it's kind of like a desire. A desire sometimes is to, in a sense, go away from the form of mediation that has, in a sense, enveloped you, enclosed you, and to actually go outside and see something else. What you see may be mediated by maybe your very vision is mediated in this regard, but it's simply also the question of how the body is, in a sense, it's, I hate to use the word freedom, but I mean the question of the body's sense of agency to be able to relate a filmic experience, which is a very specific experience, to an experience which is not, which has other kind of forms of connection that are not just, a screen and another screen, So, I mean, in this regard, a film festival is a very particular thing, because we see films in a way, often films which we cannot see any other way, other than in festivals. I mean, our film, the title "Common Birds," it might be interesting to say where this comes from. It came from a conversation, a discussion that we were lucky to have with the audience as well, with Jean-Marie Straub and Daniel Huillet at a retrospective, where they were actually talking about the artificiality of festivals and how it created this kind of space where a kind of, for them, what was an unnatural, vis-a-vis, in a sense, what would be, in a sense, normal film distribution way of seeing their films. And they said, we don't want to be enclosed in these kind of ghetto spaces of, a festival, which immediately has the connotation of films which are for a specific type of public. We want to, in a sense, just make our films for anybody who wants to see them in any condition that they want to see them. And in this sense, they said, we are not intellectuals, we are uccelli comuni. We are common birds. And this stuck with us, this phrase, common birds, and we thought, this was 2001.
The big Turin Festival retrospective.
And when we came to make this film, this phrase came back very strongly in the mind about what it was to be a common bird, and to be, in a sense, in the possibility of just seeing a film, making a film in a particular way that was not striving to be, positioned in this particular way, but was just simply the natural reaction to the materials and the forces that we had in front of us.
Sorry, I have a slightly impish question, but this encounter was at the festival?
Turin Film Festival.
Yes.
It was a proposition against festivals?
No, it was the complete retrospective of Straub and Guillet in Torino in 2001. So Danielle was still alive, and it was amazing 10 days of talking to them and to the missing people that would show up.
But they said that at the same time that the kind of Q&As that they had at the festival were very, very strongly mediated by an idea that their cinema was a very intellectual, difficult cinema, that a lot of the people attending the screenings were film students. And so they were kind of positioned precisely by this kind of expectation that happened. And they said, when we do get the chance to show our films in cinemas, we get people, all kinds of people, and really, incredible, you get people, farmers, you get all kinds of people, and the films speak to them in another way, and they're not about, theorizing about it, or they don't treat the film as this kind of this discursive proposition that speaks to a particular aspect of their life, in a way that is not necessarily the case in film festivals and the way that films are, received, mediated, and discussed. So.
I think it's all about also these two films which we have seen tonight. It's all about accessibility of films, and as you mentioned, the Straub films. This is also a kind of to intellectualize a lot about them, even though you could have totally other access to this kind of films. And this is what in general is wrong, I think, in our way of thinking about cinema in public and in newspapers and film critics also. And you should perhaps offer another approach to these films. And there I come back to our trouble feature. Perhaps this can be an idea to give another access by combining them. So it was, for me, it was also a very didactic approach to put them together as we have seen them. And perhaps this could be an idea of talking about films for a wider public. So first show perhaps the second film we have seen, and then to talk about both of the films and to do a workshop out of it, just as an idea.
I'm afraid we are kind of forgetting about our common birds. They're flying away. So, do you want to add anything? We're sorry that we didn't ask you earlier. We have microphones, don't we? Yeah. Please. Yeah.
Hi, I'm here. I have one comment and one question for you. My comment was that I wanted to highlight how the two movies for me highlighted the sounds of the first movie, because I was really invited to follow you kind of into the woods, and I was really relieved when we arrived there, because the urban sphere was very disturbing, and you left it like this, and that was good. And when we arrived in the forest, it was very calm, and I really felt the urge to go to the forest now, like leave the cinema and go there now. And then, the second movie was the opposite of it. It was very much like we are used to consume media. It was also how they muted the sound, played like background music to discuss the important stuff, and then came up with, I don't know, small town stories and stuff. So for me, it really how do you say, verfestigt, made the wish to go into a forest much stronger. And that was my comment on the sound, because I think that was something that was very good highlighted by the two movies. And my question was for you, for the directors of Common Bird. Was there something that you were missing? You said it's not. It doesn't have a topic, but something that you would like to highlight more. My question was like the comrade thing, like how to have a utopia, a non-urban utopia. Was there something that you would like to talk about more? That was my question.
Talk about more now or in the film?
No, like now. I mean, for instance, if you were limited by the double feature, what was limited? What do you think? Like, should we have more like a political discussion now, or what's your wish to talk about?
Well, I mean, it's interesting that you talk about sound, because this sonic component is obviously very, very important for us, and we think about film very much, in a sense, from the idea of a composition sonically. And this means that for us, the language or speech acts in the film are not primarily speech acts, or not, let's say, only speech acts. They're also parts of a kind of, they're expressions of a melodic nature. And so we think about the question of language or of speech, not language, speech, in the film as being, in a sense, contributing to this kind of multiple space of sound where all of the elements are like in some kind of forms, in a form of, I'm not going to say harmony, because that would be the wrong word to use, but they're in kind of a space of co-resonance where they give space to each other. And this is very important, that we don't overwhelm the film with music, we don't overwhelm the film with speech, there's space for the trees to express, the wind, all of these kind of things, the birds obviously, and the very small sounds. And so there's this question of the delicacy of this attention to sound. And if there was one thing I could say about Pontypool when I saw it, was I felt overwhelmed all the time by this kind of sonic violence of the film, which may be a trouble in a way. But it's something that, for example, I thought, is that what people, maybe after the experience of our film, would they want to be assaulted by this sonic violence? Would this necessarily be something they would choose after, let's say, the quiet or the calm of that particular space? So this is also a question, it's an ecological question as well, about a certain question of the ecology of film and sound and so on. I mean, I'm not going to say that sonic violence, I'm necessarily against it, because I think that sometimes sonic violence is quite interesting and it works really well in cinema. Godard is a filmmaker who uses a lot of kind of very kind of sometimes aggressive contrasts of sound and destructive use of sound. But I found, I mean, maybe it was the conditions in which I saw the film, but I found this film, in a sense, I found its sonic violence was not, it was too obvious for me, perhaps. I mean, and to maybe go back to this question of what you were saying about the obviousness of it, I found it a bit too obvious. I found that there wasn't enough, let's say, interplay or even space given to the question of the linguistic virus. I found that was a good idea, but it wasn't interestingly thought out. I mean, it became a kind of a trope in a way, that a tick. It was like a tick in a way of the film, and it didn't give me a kind of sense that I wanted, that I was interested in following this thing through. So.
Do we have any more responses?
Hi, I just wanted to say that I really admired seeing Common Birds. Like, I found it such nice pictures, also such a nice cinematography. And then I just wanted to ask, when you're saying the film really has no topic, really doesn't it have a topic? Because for me it was kind of also this journey of the two protagonists in the beginning, and that being black and white, it was almost like them being forced out of the city, kind of. And also, this taking place in Athens and having the history of big demonstrations there. So my question is really, is this part of a topic? Because I kind of saw it like this.
I just wanted to just add something to that, which is, we're talking about obviousness and didacticism, and I actually did think that there were moments in Common Birds that were quite didactic and obvious and literal in a way that really worked for me, especially in the conversation between the two men and the bird queen. I don't know. Yeah. And there were sort of these conversations about debt and capitalism that I thought were rendered in some obvious ways, and you were playing with that in my interpretation of the film. So I just wanted to add to that, so that we don't create, again, this false binary of an obvious film and a not obvious film.
So maybe to go back to the question of the topic. Well, I mean, I think that, again, it's very difficult in this situation, and I feel quite uncomfortable about, in a sense, putting this kind of critical gaze on the film that we've made, because I think that when you're making a film, you're led by lots of different things. Lots of different forces, in a sense, are involved, and they come together in sometimes quite mysterious ways, and one assembles these things, one assembles. But in doing that, you're not thinking about, in a sense, the topic or the film as having a topic. You're thinking about how to connect this with this, how to connect this aspect with this aspect. And I think that the question of the topic, if it exists for precisely who sees the film, and then will, in a sense, find ways of framing and what they, everybody has an angle of how they are going to see and take, and what they're going to take away from a film. And of course, that's completely normal. But I don't see, for us, it's not useful for us to look at it in that way. And I think if we looked at it in that way as we were making it, we would, in a sense, reduce ourselves, and what we are trying to do is to make the film as open as possible, also because the experience for us is an open experience, and it's continually changing, and there are continually new things, new dynamics which are entering, and it's really a question of keeping, in a sense, this kind of slightly chaotic sort of set of forces and finding a kind of form that will hold them together, but not, in a sense, neutralize them, that will keep them alive. And for us, the question of form is something which will hold together forces, but maintaining their force. So, I can't really talk about it in any other way than that.
I think you were more rejecting the idea that your film is about the topic of language, etc., etc., and beforehand. And but there are so many layers, and it is, I would say, the duty, in a way, of the spectator to get the layers and to get all these kind of topics that might be there. And of course there are lots of ideas in your film that you could talk about as a topic, like as we had before. And yeah, so but it's not that you could say, so your film is about this and that. And I think this is the strong side also of your film. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I have another very, very impish question. Why are you here then?
Sorry, I didn't hear. Why?
It's in an evil question, but why are you here then?
Why are you here?
You're well, I asked first. No, but I'll answer. We are here because we think that there is value in discussion. We think that there is value in gauging the reactions, and it's not, of course, I completely agree with you that it's not the film anymore now. It's not the same body now. And this combination of the films showing Pontypool after your film does not leave your film unscathed. It is maybe a violent act against your film, but maybe it's also a violent act against Pontypool. Who knows? They are both films that create something new in this space. Maybe you might call it dispositif, I don't know. It's we think that there can happen something new, something interesting can happen with this, and we are interested in what this can create. That's why we are here. What I don't understand, maybe not completely, and that's
why we go to festivals.
No. But you say that you believe your film should, to put it plainly, speak for itself, to be an open invitation for the audience to engage with it. But why then do you do Q&As?
The first thing is a very general thing, that a work has possibly a duration and a life that goes far beyond us. This is very clear, and in this we are like our presence in front of a work is minuscule, depends on the destiny of humanity, but it's not that the person who is making the film is the one that controls the work, but the work has more life than you imagine. Why we go to festivals, and we really enjoy talking to people who watch our films for many reasons. Sometimes they reveal things to us that we hadn't seen at all. Sometimes it's a question of finding new angles of and also the question of giving back a film to life after working on it for many years. It's a very exciting moment, because it's really the moment when, also for the actors, for the people who participated, because for us cinema is really a collective process. It's, I don't know, it's very exciting tomorrow to be able to write to the kids in the island that we showed the film in Berlin and we accompanied it, and we shared some of the things that, just these things.
But I didn't ask you why. I did not ask you why. I understand completely why you go to festivals. I understand completely why you talk to people here. Of course, why wouldn't you? Why are you here up on stage? Because we are having this conversation now, after this showing, and this is changing your film. So, but you say that you would rather have your film be...
That's not
maybe I misunderstood.
No, that's not what we said. We said that simply, I mean, we are here also to hear other people say, reactions to this dispositif. I mean, it's not necessarily primarily our place to respond to it. I think that we are here also maybe to respond to those reactions, but we wouldn't put ourselves in this kind of primary place. Also because, I mean, it's I mean, we're here also because we're very, I don't know, polite, nice people who accept invitations. I mean, and perhaps maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we should, I don't know, maybe we should think
maybe
twice.
Maybe you shouldn't.
We should think twice. But I don't think necessarily, I mean, we can be here and we cannot say anything and that can be a response. I mean, it's not necessarily, I mean, maybe we have not much to say, I mean, about... we were talking about this, we said we didn't really have much to say about Pontypool, for example, as a film. But we're interested, obviously, I mean, you've created this kind of device or this curatorial practice, and I mean the people who are here who've come to see the film, maybe they have things to say as well. So I mean, it's not necessarily just a discussion among us, it can be a discussion with other people. I mean, also we can, pose questions to you, like, for example, why did you decide to choose this particular film, to pair with our film? I mean, which you still have not answered, really. I mean, so...
You didn't ask us.
Okay, so now we're asking. So there you go. So we're contributing.
Should I? You want to?
I can only talk about one idea. The one idea was creating a new language means that you're creating a new consciousness. It's yeah.
Consciousness about what? In general, or
in a political sense, and you can think in a new way, make a little bit tabula rasa with former commonplaces, or I don't know. That was a first idea. I don't know what was.
But this,
yeah.
I would say, this refers much more to your film that you have chosen, and not to their film. So to make tabula rasa with formats and
no. It was also about the bird singing, and it's this El Silbo language. It was it was interesting to see that you tried to create another form of speaking. I didn't know El Silbo, and it was interesting to know a different way of not using the common language. And I don't know. And then we watched movies about this idea of a kind of new language, of a possibility to escape this common meaning of words, and
so it
have
was
an
quite
arbitrary sense of language, and create an arbitrary sense of language. That was a little bit the
So it was
motivation.
quite topical, your choice.
Actually not. I mean, I don't know if we can, but no, sure. I mean, this was not our first choice. We watched several films, and for reasons of distribution, I mean, I know your team tried very hard to get other films that were our first choices, and for reasons of distribution that did not work out. And I think this was third choice.
Yes.
And the other films had, if one wants to use the word angle, I don't know, completely different angles. They were not about language.
Yeah, that was only one aspect.
Yeah, we had a film that dealt more. We have to thank you actually for because we did not know about the undercommons before we saw your film, and that was a very great read for us. And one of our ideas responded to that. Another one responded more to this idea of utopia. They were from very different, let's say, spheres again. So when we realized that this was going to be the film that was going to be shown, we also had to, I don't know, find a way to deal with it in some way. It's not that we love Pontypool, but we think there's something there. I don't know.
I mean, I might be repeating myself, but I also don't really see why it's so wrong for it to be topical. Every double feature we have in this program has some. We have put in words something that brings those two films together. It might not be topical. It could be formal. I mean, so it's just an approach, and maybe what Graeme says, you know, this is a symptom of this practice that we have put into place. I don't think there is any double feature we have that completely escapes some kind of framework. So a topical framework is one of them. I think, as Dunia said, you could argue maybe that some people might not find it challenging enough. There could be other, and of course, the filmmakers would feel a certain way because we've put them on stage to talk about their film and given them this variable that they didn't control. But as curators or critics, I don't think there's anything wrong with I don't think you can escape choosing some kind of angle.
No, I was just responding to what Martin was saying because the arguments relating to Pontypool were mostly similarities in or links in the topic. That's what I was reacting to, and I think it's always more fruitful when there's more than just a link between subjects. I think there's it's much about the formal devices and sensibilities, and it doesn't need to be a link in the way that two films are doing the same thing, not at all. But I think that there is also in the contrast there can be something fruitful, and that's what I was reacting to. I had the impression, but maybe this is linked to my own preconceptions, that there was a little bit something cynical about the choice, that it was not
absolutely not,
that because you just said that you were not so convinced by the film, and that's what I heard, and that's what I saw in the film also. Maybe okay, this is I'm less less nuanced than Devika, because there is something in this film also that's interesting, but it's under a lot of layers, so it takes a lot of digging to get to them, to these more interesting questions in Pontypool, which is why I had the impression that part of the allure of this film, this is my reading, is also some kind of provocation of because you wrote something about the festival routines, so this would not be a film that we would program. This is what I understood also, that this idea.
Where did we write that? What do you mean?
In your mails before, trying to frame what is the concept of the trouble feature, you wrote about this.
Can you repeat it? Then I can address it.
Can I repeat what?
What we wrote. What do you mean?
That there's something about the categorization of films and the festival routines. What is being shown in a festival? That this was something you wanted to reflect.
Yes. No, that's absolutely true. That is definitely part and a major aspect of the idea behind it, but it's not the only thing.
I don't know. I just feel like we're talking in a lot of contradictions and circles, because we can say contrast is fruitful. We also said opposition is cheapening. So, you know, I just think that, yeah, and I don't think that a formal similarity is necessarily always better than, or a formal link, not to use the word similarity, is better than a topical one. So I don't know, maybe it's a cop-out, but I just kind of keep coming back to the idea that there are certain inescapables when you program series or double features. And of course, you can argue that some series are better curated than others, that some raise more interesting questions than others. But I think it's hard to pin that down on an approach.
But I would like to ask you also about the idea of the trouble feature, because actually we had this kind of trouble. I felt it, so you succeeded, and also we have this kind of trouble here in our discussion. What is your idea behind this notion of trouble? And don't answer like it's rhyming on double.
Andrey wrote a very good text about it. Oh no, but please.
Could you answer this?
I don't know. We want to create a sense for dissents, not for consents. That people meet in peer groups at their festivals, and we want to break up the bubbles a little bit. I don't know, and combine movies which don't fit together in the everyday festival life. I don't know. Yeah,
it's a very simple idea. I mean, we just we look at the films. I don't think that we have any exclusion impulse, and we do see a lot of problems with a lot of different films. We see a lot of problems with ourselves. It's
But one of the things, I mean, that I was thinking about the question of trouble, and we were maybe talking about this a little bit before, was that as a kind of natural, as a result of what one does when one, like, making a film, the process which involves, in a sense, a lot of dynamics, which in a sense you are involved already in trouble. I mean, in a way, in the sense that the film has certain forces and dynamics that are pulling against each other. So there's a question of the trouble which exists in a film, and sometimes I feel that the discussion, for example, the discussion we've had, this trouble which exists within the single film itself has been elided, both in the case of our film, I mean, in the sense of where we put these certain things together, which are, I think the film was described in one press release I saw as being they escape from Athens and go to a paradisiacal realm where they get on splendidly with the birds or something. And I thought, my God, I mean, that's just so not true. But this complexity which exists within the film, and it's true both of our film, and I think it's also probably true of Pontypool itself, is elided in this discussion, because we're continually putting, this question of the connection between the two. Are they connected? Are they not connected? So the singularity of the films tends to somehow disappear, both of them. I mean, I'm just talking about our film, but also the singularity of Pontypool itself and what its trouble is, I mean, we could talk about that, each film separately and its trouble, as opposed to talking about the trouble that is caused by the meta trouble, the double trouble, the double trouble, because it seems to me that kind of somehow simplifies and banalizes the actual, let's say, that dissonance which is internal to the films, to each film.
We have to mention that this is not a typical trouble feature. Normally we are at festivals and we do it with the audience and we change the seats with the people we auslosen. Was heißt auslosen?
It's like what the Greeks do. They choose by
yes, what's the name of it?
Los.
Yeah. It's like in a lottery. Yeah. Yeah, and the people sit at the screen, and we change the positions, and sometimes it really worked because and we really talk about not only talk about topics, we also talk about banalities or and associations, completely
Whatever
spontaneous.
comes to mind.
Yeah, whatever comes to mind, and it's always interesting because everyone has a different access to it, and it's also interesting to give people the opportunity to talk so deep about movies. It's not normal if you are going to Crossing Europe or something. Many regular people who don't go often to cinema are there, and suddenly they talk a lot about impressions. And normally we have this experimental modes that we use cards with terms or with sentences, or and let the people associate. Yeah.
No, I do. I think it's linked a lot to the fact that we sat here and there was only one topic for this time we sat here. It was we had only a meta discussion, so it was only the trouble about it was only trouble about trouble, and very self-reflective, and there was no direction this talk was going to. So I think it's there's a need to end the trouble.
Perfect conclusion. No direction. That's the best direction. But I mean, we're constantly talking about audience. Can we ask a last, maybe? I mean, for the people who are still.
I think we have to be honest. They all left.
Then maybe the ghosts can speak. Yes.
Very subtle.
So let's make an end to the trouble. Thank you a lot for challenging us with the discussion, and thank you a lot for you and the common birds.
Thank you.